If you go to Pearl Harbor today, it's a very moving place to be. You take the Park Service launch over to the Arizona Memorial. You go aboard, you see the plaque with the names on it. And of course, it straddles what remains of the USS Arizona. You can see where the turrets were originally placed. You can see the rusting hulk under you. And you'll see every once in a while a droplet of oil come up to the surface. And you'll see the rainbow surface of the water. Some survivors and certainly people who look at it have called them black tears, those drops of oil commemorating that terrible day in December of 1941.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Hawaii is a paradise. And the sailors who were there, who were fortunate, at least they thought, fortunate enough to be stationed in such a paradise, this was duty from heaven. And suddenly, in an instant, this turns into a hell. If you woke up and you lived above Honolulu and you looked down at the harbor, all you saw was beautiful blue skies one minute, smeared with black smoke the next, flames, ships on fire, you couldn't really see much. The attack happened so suddenly, and the battleships came under attack almost immediately. The explosion aboard the Arizona occurred when a high-level bomber got lucky, dropped its ordnance, which was maybe a 1,000-pound bomb. It may have been bigger, but it had been a converted artillery shell, an armor-piercing artillery shell. It was now an aerial bomb. Went through several decks, all the way forward where the main powder magazine was, hit the powder magazine, exploded the powder, and it was a horrendous explosion that followed. It literally lifted the front end of the ship out of the water, broke it loose from the rest of the ship, and then sank in the mud. Pieces of the ship came down a mile away. There were body parts coming down. They think at least 1,000 sailors may have been killed instantly when that bomb hit and the explosion followed. It was a horrendous event. Over on the other side of Ford Island, there was a former battleship, USS Utah. It had been a battleship, it had been converted to a target ship. And they used to take it out on drills, and the Army and the Navy and the Marine pilots would practice dropping bombs, not live bombs, dummy bombs on the deck, which had been reinforced with timbers to protect it. And a Navy corpsman named Lee Susi, he was ready to sit down to breakfast when he heard aircraft going over. And he thought it was odd on a Sunday. But as he said to me, he said, those crazy Marines will do anything. So they're probably out this morning, and they're going to probably drop a few things, and we'll have our breakfast. Well, they did drop a few things, but they weren't dummy bombs, they were real. And when he saw two bombs hit a hangar over on Ford Island, his immediate response was, oh my God, those are live bombs. Someone's in big trouble for this. And then more bombs dropped, and within several minutes, an aerial torpedo hit the side of the ship. The ship lurched, and they realized they were under attack, and within minutes the ship started to list. Lee Susi and his shipmates didn't know exactly what to do. He headed for his battle station. And when he got up to the deck, he heard the abandoned ship, and he went over the side. He still didn't know what was going on. He knew that the ship was being attacked, but he didn't know who was doing it. The ship rolled on its side, sank at the pier. It was a total loss. The hulk is still there. There's a memorial, so if you drive over to that side of the island, you can see the USS Utah. When Admiral Yamamoto was planning the attack on Pearl Harbor, he ran into an obstacle. One of his main weapons was going to be torpedo bombers. But the way torpedoes work, if they're dropped from a plane, they'll hit the water and they'll go to a certain depth and they'll arm themselves, and then they'll follow their path till they hit the side of a ship or whatever target is intended. Pearl Harbor's waters are fairly shallow. We're talking 40 feet maybe in places, a little shallower than that. And he knew it wouldn't work. And so they actually made torpedoes that would arm themselves and explode in shallow water. They practiced with them in Japan until they perfected it, and those are the torpedoes that were used at Pearl Harbor. And if you were a sailor on one of these ships and you felt the torpedo hit the way Lee Susi felt it hit, it lifted you off the deck plates, literally. The shock of the explosion lifted you up off maybe a few inches, and then you went back down again. And then when the ship started to list a few moments later, you realized you're in trouble, because they realized the ship was going to roll over, and if it rolled over, they weren't going to get out of it. Of course, the USS Oklahoma did roll over, and there were men trapped in the lower decks. And for days afterward, they heard the taps of the men trying to indicate to the rescuers that they were in there, and they were helpless. They saved some by using acetylene cutting torches to get through the hull, and they were able to get to some of them. But they found their remains probably a month later when they were able to turn the ship back right side up. Another hospital corpsman, a fellow named Sterling Cale, he remembered getting off duty that night. He was going to go home and get some rest Sunday morning, have some breakfast, get some sleep, and he heard aircraft. And he looked up and he saw them flying fairly low, heading out over the harbor, and then he saw the bombs dropping, the torpedoes hitting the water, and explosions, and he realized they were under attack. He almost immediately saw that they were Japanese. He saw the Japanese insignia on the sides of these aircraft. He immediately ran to the armory to try to get in and get some weapons so he could hand out weapons to the troops so they could defend themselves. Couldn't get the padlock off, so he jimmied it open and managed to reach the armory and the racks where the '03 Springfield bolt-action rifles were, World War I vintage, I should add, and he began handing out the rifles to anyone who would take one, along with bandoliers of ammunition. They didn't really have much of a chance of stopping Japanese planes with rifles, but that's all they had. Shortly thereafter, the master chief at the dispensary threatened him with a court-martial. And of course, Sterling Cale was incredulous. He said, "We're being attacked. Master Chief, we're being attacked. I was handing out weapons so we could defend ourselves." And the chief said, "Well, we're not at war." And he said, "Well, it looks like a war to me." As it turned out, the following day, President Roosevelt declared war on Japan, and Congress approved it, so he didn't get court-martialed. I think they gave him a couple of packs of cigarettes and some chocolates. These planes were coming wave upon wave upon wave. Certainly the first wave came in, and then an hour later the second wave came in. But in that hour, the anti-aircraft guns were up and running, and the second wave didn't do as well as the first wave. Several Japanese planes were downed. One of the heroes of the Pearl Harbor attack, of course, was Dorie Miller, who was an African-American. Here was a man who was a very large individual, a very powerful, muscular man, a very capable man. He enlisted in the Navy, and of course he was given the job of mess steward. But when the chips were down and battle stations were called, he went to a battle station. He went to an anti-aircraft gun and helped man that anti-aircraft gun. And his job even then was in support. He was to hand ammunition to the gunner. Well, the gunner went to get more ammunition, and when he came back, there's Dorie Miller behind the anti-aircraft gun firing at the Japanese planes. And he was doing a pretty damn good job of it, because the man who was the captain of that gun decided to let him continue doing what he was doing because he was doing such a good job. Now, it's said that he downed 2 Japanese airplanes. I'm not sure that's ever been confirmed. But his heroism was understood. He was written up in several newspapers following this. It came to the attention of Admiral Nimitz, who took charge of the Pacific Fleet after Pearl Harbor. And there's a very famous photograph of Dorie Miller having the Navy Cross pinned onto his uniform by Admiral Nimitz. Of course, that's the second highest award next to the Medal of Honor. When it was all said and done, he went back to his original job in the galley. But he was held up as an example of the waste of talent because of the nature of society back then and segregation and racist policies of the time. The Nevada, they tried to make a run for it. They realized that maybe they could get out of the harbor. Well, they were hit heavily. The Japanese planes saw this one battleship heading for the exit, and they worked it over pretty badly. The acting commander aboard decided maybe it would be better to beach it at Hospital Point near the hospital and keep the mouth of the harbor open. And that's what happened. They beached it. And it was, of course, salvaged and fixed up and ended up fighting again at Normandy. Another little-known incident was the fact that the Japanese were using midget submarines. There were several midget submarines that were involved in the attack. One actually made it into the harbor and was sunk. Another submarine didn't make it into Pearl Harbor, but ended up getting into a bad current. Its compass went awry, and the two Japanese officers who commanded it ended up abandoning ship on a beach just north of Pearl, near Bellows Field, which was an Army Air Force installation. And this Japanese ensign named Sakamaki, that was his last name, was apprehended and arrested and taken prisoner as prisoner of war. We left Sterling Cale getting his box of chocolates and cigarettes for having broken over the armory, but several days later he was ordered to get a group of men together, sailors, about a dozen sailors, and go out to the Arizona. And their grim task was to recover bodies. The Arizona burned for about 5 or 6 days. I don't think they found any survivors. It was one of those things where it was just such a horrible explosion and the fires were so hot. And Sterling Cale was not a diver, that was not his profession, but he donned a diving suit. They gave him instructions on how to do it, and he ended up bringing bodies aboard. But the worst part, as he recalled, was going up to the bridge, which was still above water on the Arizona, and seeing little piles of ashes, and realizing that those little piles of ashes had been human beings who had been incinerated by the flames. Admiral Yamamoto, who planned the attack, had been in the United States. He had traveled extensively through the United States. He had seen the oil fields in Texas. He had seen the industrial plants. He knew the United States was rich with resources and could turn out war material if they wanted to. So he wasn't in favor of war with the United States, but in the final analysis, he planned the attack on Pearl Harbor and he backed his emperor. After Pearl Harbor was attacked, Yamamoto realized what had occurred, and he said, "I fear we have awakened a sleeping giant." It was successful on a short term. As a tactical victory, it was. Strategically, it wasn't. The Japanese did not totally destroy the Pacific Fleet. They damaged and destroyed several battleships, and a lot of other ships were destroyed or damaged seriously. A lot of them were put back into operation fairly quickly. The Japanese missed the repair yards. They missed the oil storage tanks. But most of all, they missed the aircraft carriers that were out at sea at the time. They were hoping the carriers would be into Pearl Harbor because, as things turned out, battleships were not going to be the ships that would win World War II. It was going to be the aircraft carriers. Yes, it was a tactical victory, but it was a strategic loss for the Japanese because it aroused the United States to enter World War II. It aroused that sleeping giant.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
If you go to Pearl Harbor today and you start walking across the little bridge that takes you into the Arizona Memorial, and you look off to your left, you'll see another battleship, a battleship that's above water and looks very healthy. You see the USS Missouri, great battleship that's now a museum ship. You see Bookends for World War II for the United States. You see the beginning of the war when you look down at the wreckage of the Arizona, and you look to your left and you see Final Victory on the deck of the USS Missouri, where the surrender documents were signed by the Japanese on September 2nd, 1945. The documents that indicated that World War II was finally over.